All right, Doug, I mean, the numbers themselves are almost inconsequential. Phenomenal revenue growth, phenomenal profitability. When you look at going forward, the release of these new Blackwell chips, and of course, the broader adoption of AI itself, Nvidia, in your view, remains on top.
It does. And I mean, Romaine, to the point of using AI and AI transforming everything in the world, we use AI at Intelligent Alpha to do our portfolio management. So our AI systems really believe in what's coming from AI, and they think NVIDIA is the best way to play that wave. And I don't blame them. You know, you look at sort of everything we heard from the hyperscalers over the past quarter. Everyone to a T said that they are continuing to spend on CapEx. Meta increased their CapEx guidance. So coming into the quarter tomorrow for NVIDIA, you have to feel pretty confident that the numbers are going to be at least okay. And then on top of that, I think you have some of this optionality with, can they maybe get back into China with some recent reports? And that might help the stock continue to work from here.
Yeah, I am curious about that. And we should point out the estimates, at least the Bloomberg consensus estimate, $43 billion in revenue for the quarter, adjusted gross margin at 71%. And of course, they have released those new Blackwell chips, but a lot of questions concerned about whether they can actually get back into China with those other chips here. Do you have any expectation that some sort of a deal will be worked out with the Trump administration to allow this?
I certainly don't think we'll get much of a sense for that tomorrow. I mean, obviously, the real, I think, catalyst for this is not can NVIDIA build alternative chips. Reports from yesterday suggest they've already sort of done that. The question really is, will this administration sort of lighten the export controls that they have on those chips and just allow them to sell them into China? To put it in perspective, I think when they were disallowed from selling the H20 chips that they used to sell, they wrote down $5.5 billion worth of those chips just a month ago. It was probably about a $15 billion annualized hit to revenue or so. So it's still a really big opportunity for them. And even if they're coming back to the market in a smaller way, potentially with these new chips, you might still have kind of a $10 billion kind of upside. I do think we'll find a way that NVIDIA will be back in China, but my guess is it takes a couple of months before it happens.
So, and we're talking $15 billion. That was, I think, the 2026 sales projection, the $15 billion hit here. And that's just on the H2O restrictions, right? That doesn't take into account anything else?
That's correct. It was really focused on those H20 chips that were officially sort of banned, and then they wrote them down as a consequence.
So where do we stand right now with the GB300s? Is that still part of the discussion as well?
I don't know that those are going to be part of the discussion, because it sounds like really what's happening is they're sort of taking the overall Blackwell architecture, and what's coming out of their new sort of, cut down version of that will replace potentially this H20. It may even be lower powered than what they were previously in market with. And so I wouldn't really comp it necessarily to some of the things that they're selling in the US in terms of the Grace Blackwell chips, that are sort of built in for data centers to just be installed. I think they'll probably look something different than that. And some of the reports we've seen have talked about kind of a $6,000 to $8,000 potential sales price. That kind of gives you a sense when you're comping that against, $40,000 a chip for stuff in the US, it is going to be significantly different.
There's been a lot of talk as to how long NVIDIA can keep this going with regards to the sort of relentless demand for their chips. We just, of course, last week had a deal announced with regards to Oracle. There was whatever that deal was struck over there in the Middle East during Trump's visit there here. At some point, this growth has to slow down, right, Doug? I mean, I know there's an addressable market here that's pretty vast right now, but at some point they're going to hit that limit. When do you start to get worried about that?
I think it can probably last longer than many investors think. And if you look at the street numbers, we're kind of getting into that sort of mid-teens kind of growth into next year off of obviously the last year where we've grown well over 100%. So I think some of that is already baked into numbers to some degree. But I think you have to go back to some of the commentary we keep hearing from these hyperscalers. Meta has said it, Google has said it, OpenAI has said it. They've all mentioned that demand for them is really off the charts. And in many cases, they're not able to serve all the demand that they're getting from customers right now. And so I think you're going to continue to see them needing to build new data centers, more data centers focused on inference, so really delivering on those demand queries from users. And I think that could give a longer tail to this NVIDIA tailwind than most investors are probably thinking.
With regards to inference, and there's been a lot of talk about this idea that what it takes to sort of build up these systems, these large language models, requires a level of computing power that is much higher than what it takes effectively to maintain them, at least when we're talking about inference here. How does that factor into your outlook for NVIDIA? Does that mean a drop in revenue? Does that mean, is there a refresh cycle that maybe they can capitalize on? How do they fit into all that?
Not necessarily a drop in revenue. I think there's a couple ways you can think about that. In some cases, right, chips that you were previously using for training, you might repurpose them for other use cases, and some of those use cases may include inference. You may build inference dedicated stacks and data centers. And so it kind of all, I think, fits together in the general guise of there's just this huge demand for additional compute. Once the training is done, right, that is sort of a discrete time-bound activity where you're building a new model. Then you have the ongoing and persistently growing demand for using that model, and that's really where the inference comes in. And so I think it's something where you can have those training dedicated clusters, but then you need to make sure you have enough on the other side to support inference beyond just having stuff that's training that's repurposed.